The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the quiet town. As Mark walked along the deserted streets, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the empty air. He had lived in this small place for years. But tonight something felt different, a chill in the breeze, a strange sense of anticipation that he couldn't shake. He glanced around, hoping to catch a glimpse of something familiar. But everything seemed still, almost too still. He quickened his pace, as if trying to outrun whatever was beginning to gnaw at his mind. The streetlights flickered above, as if sensing the same unease that had settled in his chest. His thoughts wandered to the strange phone call he had received earlier that day. It had been a number he didn't recognize. The voice on the other end had been soft and hesitant, asking if he was still in town and if he had seen anything out of the ordinary. He had tried to brush it off, thinking it was just a wrong number, but the way the voice trembled stuck with him, a strange sense of urgency that he couldn't ignore. He decided to walk past the park, hoping the fresh air would clear his mind. As he turned the corner, he caught sight of something odd. A shadow flickered in the corner of his eye. It moved quickly, as if ducking behind a tree, but there was no wind, and no one else around. He stopped in his tracks, his heart racing. He squinted into the dimming light, but saw nothing, just the empty benches and the rustling leaves of the trees. He shook his head, trying to convince himself that it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. The feeling had been growing since that phone call. Something was about to happen, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. He slowly walked into the park, the crunch of the gravel beneath his shoes the only sound. As he approached the darkened swings, a cold gust of wind swept past him, and he froze. The swing set creaked loudly in the stillness, as if someone had just been there. Mark felt a shiver run down his spine. But he couldn't leave, not yet. He needed answers. He needed to know what was happening. As he walked deeper into the park, he noticed a small figure standing by the fountain, their back turned to him. Just as he was about to call out, they turned slowly, and Mark's breath caught in his throat. It was a woman, but not one he recognized. Her face pale and drawn, her eyes hollow, as if she hadn't slept in days. She didn't say anything, just stared at him, her lips parted, as if she were about to speak. But no words came. He took a step back, his mind racing, the chill in the air growing colder, the silence between them heavy like an unseen weight. He felt his heartbeat quicken, his instincts telling him to run, but his legs refused to move, as if they were rooted to the ground. The woman took a step forward, her gaze never leaving his face, and Mark could feel his pulse thundering in his ears, every fiber of his being screaming at him to turn around and flee. But he was frozen, unable to do anything but wait. The woman took another step forward, and Mark felt his throat tighten, as if the air itself had thickened. He could barely breathe. But he couldn't look away from her empty gaze. She moved closer, her footsteps silent, like a shadow creeping toward him, and he could feel the weight of her presence pressing down on him, like an invisible hand tightening around his chest. The darkness of the park seemed to grow deeper with every passing second, and Mark felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He tried to speak, to ask her who she was, but his voice failed him. It came out as a hoarse whisper that barely made it past his lips. He swallowed hard, hoping to clear the tightness in his throat, but it only seemed to make it worse. The woman's eyes never left his face, her expression unreadable, as if she was studying him closely. Her lips trembled, as though she wanted to say something, but no words came, only silence hung in the air between them. And the longer they stood there, the more Mark felt like he was losing his grip on reality. The park around them seemed to stretch out endlessly, as if it had no end, no boundaries, just an infinite void that was closing in on him. He took a step back instinctively, his feet scraping against the gravel, but the woman's gaze followed him, her head tilting slightly, as though trying to understand his every move. Mark took another step backward, this time faster, but his body still wouldn't obey. He could feel his legs shaking now, his heart pounding his chest like a drumbeat that echoed in his ears. He wanted to run, but something inside him kept him rooted in place. The woman finally moved again, her hand slowly reaching out toward him, her fingers trembling, as though they had a mind of their own, and Mark felt a surge of panic wash over him. He had to move, he had to get away, but his feet refused to cooperate. His mind screamed at him to run, to do something, anything, but his body wouldn't listen. He was frozen, his whole body paralyzed by fear, and the woman's hand continued to move closer, inch by inch, her fingers just a breath away from touching his skin. Mark's breath quickened, his eyes wide with terror. But he couldn't look away from her hand, from the hollow eyes that seemed to draw him in, as if they were pulling him into some kind of trance. He could feel something cold, something dark, reaching out from the woman, her presence, like an anchor sinking into him, pulling him deeper into the shadows around them. His pulse quickened as he tried to back away again, but his legs wouldn't move this time. The woman's fingers brushed against his arm, and the coldness he felt was like nothing he had ever experienced. It burned and froze all at once, a jolt of ice shooting through his veins, as if the very touch of her had stripped the warmth from his body. His vision blurred for a moment as a sharp pain shot through his head, and he stumbled backwards, his knees giving way, but still he couldn't escape her presence. She was everywhere, the darkness surrounding them growing thicker, until it felt as though the whole world had narrowed down to just him and her, trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake from. Mark felt the ground beneath him shift, as though it was alive, a low rumble vibrating through his body. And then suddenly, everything went quiet, so quiet that he could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. The woman was gone, but the darkness remained, clinging to him like a second skin, the feeling of her touch still cold against his arm, as he stood there in the park alone, unsure of what had just happened or what was to come next. Mark stood in the park, the silence deafening around him, his heart still racing. But no longer trapped in the grip of fear, he took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. But the coldness from the woman's touch lingered on his skin, as though it had seeped into his very bones. He looked around the park, expecting to see something, anything that might explain what had just happened. But there was nothing, no sign of the woman, no trace of her presence. The swings hung still in the breeze, the fountain trickled softly, and the trees whispered in the wind, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. But Mark knew better. Something had happened. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had been marked. Somehow something had changed in that moment. When the woman touched him, something deep inside him that he couldn't yet understand. He rubbed his arm where her fingers had made contact, still feeling the icy burn there despite the warmth of the night. He felt an overwhelming sense of unease creeping up his spine, as if the shadows themselves were watching him, waiting for him to make a move. He turned on his heel and walked quickly out of the park, his steps quickening as he passed the darkened swings and the quiet fountain, the feeling of being followed clawing at him with every step he took. He couldn't shake the image of her face, those hollow eyes staring at him with an intensity that had shaken him to his core. He had to get away from this place, from whatever had just happened. But where could he go? What was there left to do? The phone call echoed in his mind, the voice on the other end asking him if he had seen anything strange, if anything had felt off. Mark wondered if he had seen something that he wasn't meant to, something he wasn't supposed to understand. The woman's face flashed in his mind again, the way she had looked at him, like she knew him, like she was waiting for him to figure something out. But he had no answers to give, no idea what any of this meant. He had been walking for what felt like hours when he found himself at the edge of town, the familiar streets now seeming foreign, the houses around him dark and silent, their windows empty and cold, as if the whole town had fallen asleep. But there was something off about it, something unsettling about the stillness. He stopped at the corner of Oak Street, staring down the road as a strange feeling swept over him, like a whisper in the back of his mind, telling him that something wasn't right, but he couldn't place it. What was it that felt wrong? He glanced at the row of houses along the street and caught sight of a flicker of light in one of the windows. His stomach tightened as he watched the light move inside the house. It was faint, but it was there. Someone was in there. But who and why at this hour? Mark's curiosity got the better of him, and he slowly walked up to the house, trying to make as little noise as possible as he approached the front door. But before he could reach it, the door swung open slowly, as if someone had been waiting for him. He froze, his heart skipping a beat as a figure appeared in the doorway, their face hidden in the shadows. But Mark could feel their gaze fixed on him, cold and unyielding, and he knew that whatever was about to happen would change everything. The figure in the doorway didn't move for what felt like an eternity, their presence looming over Mark, as if they were studying him carefully. His heart thudded painfully in his chest, and his breath caught in his throat. He couldn't look away from the shadows that obscured the person's face. But he could feel their eyes on him, a coldness that sent a shiver through his entire body. Mark hesitated, his instincts telling him to turn around and run, but his feet felt rooted to the ground. The air was thick with tension, as if something was about to break. But he couldn't tell what it was. The figure stepped forward, just a little, and the faint light from inside the house revealed more of their silhouette. Mark's mind raced, trying to make sense of it, trying to understand who this person was. But there were no answers, only the overwhelming sense that he had been pulled into something much larger than himself, something he had no control over. The figure spoke, their voice low and almost inaudible at first, but the words sent a jolt of recognition through him. "You shouldn't have come here," they said, and the chill in their voice froze Mark in place. He couldn't move, couldn't even blink, as the gravity of the words settled around him. Shouldn't have come here. What did that mean? Had he walked into something that was never meant for him? Was this why the phone call had happened, why the woman had appeared in the park, why everything had felt so wrong? He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The figure's hand moved to the side, and for the first time, Mark saw the faintest outline of their face. The pale skin and sharp features made his stomach drop. But it was the eyes that held him in place, hollow and dark, like two empty wells, staring into his soul. It was as if they were seeing everything about him, everything he was, and everything he had ever been. In that one fleeting glance, he felt exposed, vulnerable, in a way he couldn't explain, like something deep inside him was being peeled away piece by piece. And the more he looked, the more he felt the walls closing in around him, until there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. "What do you want?" Mark finally managed to whisper, his voice trembling with fear, but also something else, a sense of dread that had lodged itself deep within him. The figure didn't answer at first, their lips pressed together in a thin line. Before they took another step forward, Mark instinctively took a step back, but the figure moved with him, closing the distance between them slowly, carefully, as if they had all the time in the world. "I'm sorry," the figure said again, their voice softer now, but still laced with a chilling finality. "There's no turning back. Once you've seen it." The words hit him like a slap across the face. He took another step back, his mind racing, but still unable to make sense of what was happening. He didn't know who this person was, didn't know what they were talking about, but something deep inside him felt the weight of their warning. Something told him that the moment he had walked down this path, there would be no going back. He didn't know how, but somehow he knew he had crossed a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that whatever was happening now, whatever this person was, it wasn't just about him anymore. It was bigger than that, far bigger than he could ever understand. Mark stood frozen in place, the weight of the figure's words pressing down on him like 1,000 tons of stone. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. As he struggled to process what was happening, he had walked into something far deeper than he had ever anticipated. And now there was no way out. He wanted to run, to flee, but his legs felt as though they were encased in cement. The figure didn't speak again, but their eyes never left him, always watching, always waiting, as if they were waiting for him to do something, to make a decision. But Mark couldn't. He was trapped, caught in some kind of invisible web that held him tight, with no escape. He glanced down the street, but the familiar world outside the house felt distant, as though he had crossed into another reality altogether. The normality of the street was fading as his senses sharpened, and he realized how still everything had become, how utterly silent. There was no sound from the usual night creatures, no rustling of leaves or distant hum of traffic, just an oppressive quiet that hung in the air like a thick fog. The figure stepped closer again, and Mark could feel the air grow colder. He felt a chill run through his entire body, even though the night was warm, and still his breath came out in sharp bursts as he tried to steady himself. But his mind raced with fear and confusion. Where had this person come from? What were they going to do to him? What did they mean? There's no turning back. It was as if time had stopped entirely, and he was suspended in some kind of moment that had no end. The figure raised one hand slowly, as if they were about to touch him again, and Mark instinctively flinched, but their fingers never made contact. Instead, they pointed toward the street, and the faintest flicker of light appeared in the distance, as if responding to their gesture. Mark's gaze followed the direction of the finger, and he saw something he couldn't explain. There was a light moving down the street. Just beyond the house, a strange glow that seemed unnatural. It wasn't the soft yellow of a streetlight or the glow of a passing car, but a pale blue light that danced across the pavement almost like it was alive. Mark's heart skipped a beat, and his throat tightened. This wasn't right, none of this was right. And yet the figure's gaze never wavered from him, as if they had already known what was coming, as if they had seen this all before, and were simply waiting for him to understand it was too late for him to turn back. He had already stepped into something far bigger than himself, something that had been waiting for him, something that he couldn't escape. The light grew brighter now. It seemed to be getting closer, moving toward them at an unnatural speed. And Mark felt an overwhelming sense of dread rise in his chest, his body finally responding to the panic that had been building inside him. He wanted to run, he needed to run. But the figure's voice stopped him before he could move. "You'll see it soon enough," they said. And Mark's blood ran cold, because in that moment he realized they weren't talking about the light, they were talking about him. The moment had arrived, the thing that had been waiting for him was here, and there was no way out. The light continued to grow brighter as it approached the figure standing before Mark. It seemed to move faster now, as if it had a purpose. But Mark could see no source, no car, no person carrying the light, just the eerie glow floating down the street. And with each passing second, it seemed to draw closer to him, to the house, to the figure who remained still as a statue, their eyes locked onto Mark, as if they were watching his every move, as if they were waiting for him to do something, anything. But Mark couldn't move, couldn't bring himself to take a step forward or backward. It was as if the world had been reduced to just him and the light and the figure before him, and nothing else existed. No sound, no air, no escape. The light was only a few feet away now, its glow harsh and unnatural, casting strange shadows across the ground, and Mark's pulse quickened. He felt a cold sweat breaking out across his skin. He wanted to shout, to run, to do something, but the words wouldn't come, and his legs refused to carry him. His mind was locked in place, and all he could do was watch as the light moved closer, until it seemed to surround him completely, bathing the street in an eerie pale glow. And then it stopped, the light flickering just for a moment, as if it had taken a breath, before it settled around him, and the figure before him finally spoke. "The time has come," they said, and their voice was no longer soft, but commanding, filled with an authority that Mark couldn't deny, couldn't escape. Their eyes never left him as they took a step back, and the light began to pulse almost rhythmically with their words. Mark felt a tremor in his chest as the weight of their words sank in. "The time has come," for what he wanted to scream the question, but his throat felt tight, his mouth dry, as if something was pressing against it, something that kept him silent. The figure seemed to sense his confusion, and they stepped closer now, their presence overwhelming, and Mark had no choice but to take a step back. The light flickered again, casting sharp shadows that danced around them, and he saw something that he hadn't noticed before. The shadows were moving as if alive, like they were reaching for him, pulling at him, and for the first time since this strange encounter had begun, Mark felt a true sense of fear, the kind of fear that makes your skin crawl and your heart race, and every instinct inside you screams for you to run and never look back. But he couldn't move, he couldn't do anything but stand there frozen as the shadows closed in around him, and the figure continued speaking in that calm but unyielding voice. "You have seen what you weren't meant to see," they said. "You have come too far to go back now." And Mark felt his chest tighten, as if something inside him was starting to break apart. The shadows seemed to wrap around him, pulling at him like tendrils, trying to drag him into the darkness. But it was the figure's gaze that held him in place, their eyes locked onto his with an intensity that felt like it could burn a hole right through him. And for the first time Mark realized that he wasn't just standing in front of this figure anymore. He wasn't just in front of a person or a shadow or a light. He was standing on the edge of something much bigger, much more terrifying than he had ever imagined. And there was no way back from it. He was in too deep now. The figure's lips curved into a small smile. But it was not a kind smile. It was a smile that promised nothing good, and Mark's stomach churned, because he realized that whatever was coming, whatever was about to happen, was something he had no control over, and nothing would ever be the same again. The shadows continued to pull at Mark, their tendrils wrapping around his legs and arms, tugging at him Like they were trying to drag him into the ground. The coldness from the woman's touch earlier had returned, now stronger, more intense, as if the very air around him had turned to ice. He struggled against the darkness. But it was no use. The more he fought, the tighter the shadows became, and the figure's eyes never left him, watching with that same unsettling intensity. He could feel the pressure building inside him, the fear clawing at his chest, threatening to overwhelm him. And yet he couldn't move. His body felt heavy, like it was being weighed down by some invisible force. He wanted to scream, to cry out, but the words wouldn't come. His throat tight and dry, as if something was preventing him from making a sound. The light around him pulsed again, brighter, now stronger, like it was alive, its glow seeping into every corner of the street, wrapping around him, until everything was bathed in an unnatural light. The figure spoke again, their voice like ice cutting through the air. "It's too late for you," they said, and Mark felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature, something colder, deeper, something that sank into his very soul. "You have crossed the line," they continued. "And now there is no turning back." Mark's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing with questions. What did they mean? What line had he crossed? He had no answers, only an overwhelming sense of dread that was swallowing him whole. And then it hit him, the memory of the phone call earlier, the strange voice asking him if he had seen anything, if he had noticed something strange. Was this what they had been talking about? Was this what they had been waiting for? But he couldn't focus on that now, because the shadows were closing in tighter around him, and the light was so bright it felt like it was burning him. The figure took another step closer, and Mark could feel the ground beneath him shifting, as if the earth itself was moving in response to their presence. The figure reached out slowly, their hand hovering in the air, just inches from his face, and Mark could feel the chill emanating from them, like a blizzard descending upon him. He closed his eyes tightly, hoping that when he opened them again, everything would go back to normal. But when he opened them, the figure was still there, still standing right in front of him, and the shadows had only grown darker, stronger, their grip tightening with every second. As the light flickered around him, his thoughts scrambled in a panic. He needed to break free. He had to get out of here. But no matter how hard he tried, his body wouldn't respond. He was trapped. And the figure's voice broke through the chaos. "It's time, Mark," they said. And their tone had shifted. It was no longer cold, but something else, something darker and more final. Mark's mind raced, his body frozen, his heart pounding in his chest, louder and louder with each passing second. The world around him seemed to blur as the shadows reached for him, pulling him into their depths, dragging him towards something he couldn't see, but could feel, something vast and dark and empty. And just as he thought he could no longer bear it, the figure's hand touched his cheek, and everything went silent, everything except for the sound of his breath, the quiet stillness of the night hanging in the air, heavy and suffocating, as he stood there in the light, surrounded by shadows, knowing that whatever happened next, he could not escape. The touch of the figure's hand on Mark's cheek sent a jolt of cold through his body. It was a sensation that seemed to freeze everything around him. The air, the ground, the very space they stood in, everything stopped, as if time itself had paused. The shadows tightened their grip on him. But he could no longer move. He couldn't speak or scream or even breathe. It was as if he was suspended in some kind of void, trapped in a moment that had no end. The figure's face was so close now. He could feel their cold breath against his skin, their eyes still locked onto his, with that same chilling intensity, and Mark couldn't look away. No matter how much he wanted to, he couldn't tear his gaze from theirs. The figure's lips parted slightly, as if they were about to speak, but no words came. Instead, Mark felt something shift inside him, a feeling like a door opening somewhere deep in his mind. And it was then that he realized the figure wasn't just standing there, they were inside his head too. They were in his thoughts, his memories, their presence, weaving through everything he had ever known, every fear, every doubt, every moment of his life. They were all being laid bare before them. And for the first time, Mark understood what they meant by no turning back. He could feel the pull of something deep inside himself, something dark and ancient stirring beneath the surface, something that had been there all along, but he had never truly seen or acknowledged it. before he was beginning to understand what the figure was really offering him, and the thought filled him with dread. The light around him flickered and shifted, casting strange shapes on the pavement. But Mark's focus was entirely on the figure before him, their presence overwhelming, like a wave crashing over him, threatening to drown him in its depths. The figure's voice finally broke through the silence again, its tone now soft and almost coaxing. "You have always known this, Mark," they said. "You have always known the truth, but you were afraid to see it, to acknowledge it. You have spent your life running from what is inevitable. But it's time to face it now." Mark's heart skipped a beat, the words reverberating through his chest like the sound of a distant drum. He didn't want to believe it, he didn't want to admit what they were saying, but deep down, he knew it was true. He had always known. There was something different about him, something that set him apart from everyone else, something that had always whispered to him from the edges of his consciousness, telling him that he was destined for something greater, something darker. And now the figure was here to force him to face it, to accept it, to become it. Mark's mind screamed for him to run, for him to break free, to escape this moment. But his body remained still, rooted in place, unable to do anything but listen as the figure's words continued to wash over him. "You can accept it, Mark," they said again. "You can choose to embrace what you are, or you can resist. But know this, there are consequences either way." Mark's chest tightened, and his breath became shallow as the weight of their words sank in. The shadows around him seemed to pulse with an energy of their own, drawing closer with every second, as if the very darkness itself was alive and waiting for his decision. But Mark wasn't sure if he could make a choice, if he could even choose anything at all. It felt as though his fate had already been sealed long before he even stepped foot into this town, long before the figure had appeared in front of him. And as he stood there frozen in the light and the shadows, the figure's hand reached out once more, this time brushing against his skin with a touch that was both icy and electrifying. And Mark knew in that moment that nothing would ever be the same again. Mark felt the figure's touch on his skin again, and the sensation rippled through him like an electric current. Every muscle in his body screamed for him to pull away, but he was frozen in place, his mind drowning in the weight of their words and the darkness that surrounded him. The shadows seemed to grow thicker with each breath. He took the air, heavy and suffocating, as the figure's presence filled the space between them. Mark's heartbeat thundered in his chest, the only sound in the vast silence that stretched out around them. Everything else had faded away. The park, the street, the world beyond them was gone. All that existed now was the figure and the darkness, and Mark standing at the edge of something he couldn't fully comprehend. The figure's voice was softer this time, almost soothing, but there was still a deep edge of power that laced their words. "It's in you, Mark," they said, and Mark felt a shiver run down his spine. "You have always had the ability to change everything, to shape the world, to bend it to your will. But you have resisted for so long." They paused, letting their words sink into him, as if they were planting seeds in his mind, seeds that would grow into something he couldn't ignore, something he couldn't turn away from. "You can make the choice now, Mark," they continued. "You can choose to embrace your true self and step into the power that has always been yours, or you can continue to fight it, continue to run from what is inside you. But know this, there will be consequences either way." Mark felt a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead, his breath coming faster as the words began to spin in his mind. They were right. He had always felt different, always sensed that there was something inside him, something he couldn't explain or control. And now the figure was offering him a choice that seemed impossible, a choice that could change everything. But how could he make it? What did it mean to embrace this darkness that he was only beginning to understand? He didn't want to believe it, didn't want to accept the truth of what the figure was saying, but the weight of their words pressed on him like a hand on his chest, making it harder to breathe, making it harder to think clearly. The shadows around him seemed to pulse with life now, as if they were urging him to make a decision. But Mark was torn. Part of him wanted to resist, to fight back against whatever this was, to reclaim his life and walk away from this nightmare. But another part of him felt drawn to the power the figure was offering him, felt the temptation of what it would mean to accept his true self, to stop running from the darkness inside him. The figure watched him silently, their eyes never leaving his face, as if they were waiting for him to make the choice. But Mark didn't know how to choose. He felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into the unknown, with no way of knowing what would happen if he jumped, what would happen if he stepped into the shadows, embraced the darkness that had always been calling to him. Part of him was terrified of what would come next, But part of him knew that he couldn't keep running forever, that eventually he would have to face whatever it was that lived inside him, and as the figure's hand hovered just inches from his face, Mark felt something stir within him, something deep and powerful, and with a sense of finality he made his choice. Mark's decision hung in the air between them like a thick fog. The shadows seemed to breathe around him, drawing closer, wrapping around him like a shroud. His heart beat wildly in his chest. As the figure's hand remained suspended inches from his face, the figure was silent, waiting. But Mark knew that the moment had arrived, the moment where everything would change forever. He felt it deep inside him, the pull of something ancient, something dark, that had always been there, and now it was impossible to deny it, impossible to ignore. The figure's gaze never left him, watching him with those hollow eyes that seemed to see everything, every secret, every fear, every doubt. And he knew in that moment that there was no turning back, no way to undo what was about to happen. Mark took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling as the weight of the decision crushed down on him. But he didn't hesitate anymore, he didn't fight it anymore. He let the darkness inside him rise to the surface. And as he did, he felt a surge of power, a strength unlike anything he had ever known. It was like the ground itself had shifted under his feet, like the very fabric of reality had bent in response to him. He could feel the shadows around him pulsating with life, wrapping around him, pulling him closer to something greater, something that he could barely comprehend. And as the figure's hand finally touched his skin, he felt it all at once, the energy, the power, the connection between them. It was as though he had become one with the darkness, as though he had always been meant to be this way. The figure smiled, then a slow, knowing smile that sent a chill through Mark's entire being. Because in that moment, Mark understood what they had been waiting for, what had been leading him here all along. "You are ready now," the figure whispered, and Mark could feel their voice in his bones, in his blood, in the very core of who he was. It was a voice that called to him, that reached deep into the part of him that had always been waiting. And when they spoke again, he understood it all. "You are no longer a stranger to your own power," they said. "The shadows are yours to command." And Mark felt the truth of their words like an awakening inside him. It was as if something had unlocked in him, something that had been hidden, buried deep inside his soul. And with it came a sense of knowing, a sense of mastery over the darkness. He had always been afraid of. The figure stepped back, then, their face unreadable, as Mark stood there, feeling the power surge through him. It was all around him, it was in him. And for the first time in his life, he no longer felt afraid, he no longer felt small. He was something more now, something greater than he had ever imagined. And as the shadows swirled around him, he realized that his journey was only just beginning. The world he had known, the life he had lived, were gone. They no longer mattered. All that mattered now was the power that coursed through his veins, the choice he had made, the path he had taken. And as he stood there in the glow of the pale light, Mark knew that he would never be the same again.